everybody should know, Eleanor is a contributor to Newsweek magazine and the Daily Beast, writes about politics and policy in Washington, currently assigned to the White House, where, as we all know, it's a somewhat contentious re-election campaign for President Obama right now, and of course Pennsylvania right in the heart of it for the moment, and likely to reemerge as a keystone state for the election as we head into the fall. Eleanor's covered every presidential campaign since 1976. And so I can't imagine anybody better to give us some perspective on the current campaign, and especially given the topic of today's event and today's conference, the impact of energy policy, if there is going to be any impact of energy policy in the election. So welcome to Washington.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And listening to the conversation this morning, my mind did go back over the years in listening to various presidents on this issue. I came to Washington covering Jimmy Carter, and he got to the Oval Office and donned his cardigan sweater, locked all of the thermostats at, I think it was 68 degrees, delivered a speech about the need to reform our habits when it came to energy usage. He called it the moral equivalent of war, and the media quickly ridiculed that. They discovered the acronym was MEOW. And Carter created the Department of Energy, installed James Schlesinger as the head, a kind of a brilliant, disheveled guy. And energy for a time in 77 and 78 was really considered a hot topic. Carter sent wide-ranging legislation to Capitol Hill. Some of it got through, most of it got shot down. And then the hostages were taken in Iran. OPEC reared its ugly head. We had gas lines. And Ronald Reagan came on the scene with the rallying cry that the Panama Canal was ours. We built it, we paid for it, it's ours. And the campaign was off. And Reagan won rather resoundingly, and he actually said that there was more oil under second base at Yankee Stadium, that we didn't have to worry about this. And he came in, and I think with the force of his personality, in part, did restore the country's optimism. But along with that optimism went any sense that we had to do anything about the oil consumption. And so it really wasn't until, I guess, when Clinton ran in '92, and Al Gore was his running mate, and Al Gore had written a book called Earth in the Balance. And in the book he had said that at some point the gasoline engine would become obsolete. And so that got transferred into campaign rhetoric that Al Gore was trying to take away our cars. And then President Bush, George H.W. Bush, called him Ozone Man. I remember that. And then when the Clinton-Gore ticket won, they really didn't do very much about energy or conservation or ecology, whatever word you want to give to it. And when Al Gore ran in 2000, he was counseled that there are no votes in the environmental community. So he didn't really run on environmentalism. His later push about global warming and inconvenient truth all came after he had lost the presidential, or I guess some people think he won the presidential race, but he was not in the White House. And that became his cause. And for a time he put that issue really out there. But I think, as Susan Eisenhower commented this morning, that it's kind of off the charts right now because we're worried about jobs and energy production, and the climate change has really taken a back seat. Mitt Romney is in Pennsylvania today, and I've got some emails about what he said, and he's basically blasting President Obama for not drilling enough, not okaying the Keystone Pipeline, for really being a failure when it comes to our energy picture. And yet the facts really don't tell a very different story. And for whatever reason, this White House has not been very good at getting its facts out. And I think, again, campaign rhetoric that's untethered to facts seems to take hold. But I think we ended this morning on a fairly upbeat note that the energy picture is not as bleak as many people might have thought it was. And I believe this last year is the first time ever that we've actually exported oil. So anyway, it's a mixed picture, and I think we can go into more detail, but I think President Obama actually does have an energy policy. He may not have been able to get it through Congress, but he has one, and it's called all of the above. And basically, he has been trying to implement that. And I think, again, the numbers show that he has been more successful than recent presidents in changing our energy picture.
Well, when you talk about all of the above, don't they both sort of have an all of the above position when it comes to energy?
Well, I suppose they both have an all of the above, but I think that Mitt Romney's position is without regard to limits. I mean, I don't think he's concerned about the need to get off of fossil fuel. I think he thinks that solar energy and wind and all that are just whims, that they aren't really serious. I think if you're at all, if you have a green bone in your body, Mitt Romney's not your man. So I think environmentalists, if they're going to decide on that one issue, I think there's no contest. And I think the way the political dialogue has been set up, it's drill baby drill, and Romney would drill. His all of the above would go into the Alaskan Wildlife Reserve and would go into more sensitive areas that Obama has put off limits. So I think when you say all of the above, I think what Obama means is significantly different than what Romney would mean.
You mentioned the environmentalists and their vote. Do they count any more than they did for Al Gore, or that they did during the climate change, the carbon debate?
I think when the country is stressed economically, then environmental issues tend to take a back seat. And we've had periods in this country, I guess, when Earth Day came into being, where you had some single issue voters, people who would vote solely on the environment. But I don't really think that's the case anymore. And I would have liked to have seen Al Gore test that thesis. He didn't, he was advised not to make this a central pillar, in part because I think the other side has been very successful at sort of ridiculing you. If you're an environmentalist, that means you're a tree hugger, you care about the snail darter. On the McLaughlin group, whenever I say anything in favor of big infrastructure projects, which I think we need, Pat Buchanan will turn to me and say, well, will your environmental friends let you build it because of the snail darter or some other little insect that they'll find? And the Keystone Pipeline is being held up because a Republican governor in Nebraska was responding to complaints in his state that it goes through the water aquifer there. And they've now come up with TransCanada has come up with an alternative route, which is now going to be approved or put up for approval in Nebraska, and presumably will win the State Department approval. Environmentalists still won't like it because they don't like tar sands oil. Takes too much water to clean it out, I guess. But it is a misnomer to think that if we complete the Keystone Pipeline, that one, it will bring, tens of thousands of lasting jobs. It would not provide that many jobs. And secondly, it basically would transport the oil down to Port Arthur, Texas, which is sort of a foreign free trade zone, and off it would go probably to Asia. It's not like it would be cycling back to this country. But again, it's one of those easy sound bites, and I think probably if you interview most people, they equate Keystone Pipeline with more jobs and more oil independence, when in fact neither of those is the case.
So does it happen in either administration, no matter whether Romney or Obama wins? Do you think it moves forward?
I think whether Keystone Pipeline moves forward, whether either of them win, yes, definitely.
So where do gasoline prices figure into the current debate right now?
Well, gasoline prices are set, it's a global market, and you know, there are many steps along the way, and a U.S. president has very little control over gasoline prices. And if you go back and look during the George W. Bush administration, you have much of the same rhetoric, much of the same prices, and much of the same political tension. And generally, I mean, I think the feeling is that while they're high, it looks like they're not going to hit $5, which seems to be some sort of a breaking point. And short of that, I don't think gas prices are going to determine the election. But you can find charts that will show a president's approval, whether it's Obama or George W. Bush, and I'm sure you can go back further, and you can see a president's approval rise or fall based on gas prices. But I must say, watching the Republican primaries, and see Newt Gingrich he's still campaigning, by the way. He may be here in Pennsylvania as we speak. He has no chance of winning, but he somehow thinks he's giving people an alternative. But he was campaigning with a little gas pump on the podium because his kind of desperation last-minute plea was that he would bring back $2.50 gas. And he was ridiculing Obama, saying President Obama thinks the future of energy independence lies in algae. Now, there is some actually interesting research going on with algae as an energy source. It's not fanciful, but it's so easy to poke fun. But I don't think anybody believes that we're going to go back to $2.50 a gallon gas. And I don't think even supporters of Newt Gingrich believe that. But the notion that you would just kind of toss it out as a campaign slogan, I think it probably says more about the desperation of the Gingrich campaign than anything else. But maybe in people's mind's eye, there's still a time when we could, you know, fill up. But and who did I hear recently? One of Romney's people was saying that people now they can't fill up their SUVs, the full tank, because it's too expensive, so they have to keep going back because they can only afford $20 at a time. And of course, I'm thinking to myself, do they really need that SUV? You know? Actually, the car. Here's another significant difference between Obama and Romney, and Obama managed to get the first CAFE standard, the first requirements on cars to improve mileage in 30 years. And he has another piece of that that's in place, that by 2025, cars are going to get 54.5 miles per gallon. And I can't recite the numbers, but even the standards he has put in place has saved a lot of gasoline. Now, you would not have gotten that out of a Republican Party, and you wouldn't have gotten it out of a Democratic Party for a long time. John Dingell, who's the longest-serving member of Congress and a wonderful man representing Michigan, district in Michigan, was known for years as Tailpipe John. I mean, he protected the automobile industry. He pretty much single-handedly prevented any kind of pressure on the auto industry to get higher gas. And the car companies suffered because of that. If they changed their act earlier, they might not have been in the situation they were in 2008 and 2009. So that has been a big change in how politicians think and act. And it's not exclusive to one party, but Obama, he did make it happen.
Well, it's interesting. I just saw it myself firsthand over the weekend. I had to run back to the Eastern Shore in Delaware over the weekend to take care of some business for my father, and I decided to rent a car because it was a short trip. So I had a nice brand new car to drive, and it was getting 34 miles to the gallon going down and back.
Right.
And I get to Delaware, and gas was selling for $3.70 a gallon. So there's a big regional disparities in gas prices too, but I'm thinking part of the dynamic here is cars are so much more efficient. We're able to live with gas in the high $3 these days and not have it destroy us and the economy.
Right. Well, and you could also, you know, Obama has been accused of wanting higher gas prices. Now, that isn't, as he said, any president running for re-election does not want higher gas prices. In theory, though, the higher gas prices do clip consumption. Now, I do think there are some people who are genuinely and severely hurt, who drive for a living, who are not driving a Hummer. They're trying to do everything they can. And I think you can, through the tax code, give people a break if we come to that, if we ever get to any kind of serious reform. But right now, the oil companies are still getting magnificent subsidies from the Congress. I think it's, I don't know the numbers, it's way up in the many, many millions. And you know, there's an effort to strip them of that. It's not going to happen unless it happens in the context of tax reform, where you get rid of a lot of loopholes. And that would also mean probably getting rid of the subsidies that have been put in for renewables. So that's a, you know, double-edged sword there.
You mentioned the international market for gasoline. What about energy prices, supply and demand in general? How much control does Washington really have over what happens in the
Not much control at all. I mean, it's set on the world market. And, you know, there are speculators and manipulators that do get involved. And President Obama just last week called on Congress to pass legislation that would give more money to oversight to one of the bureaus to look for financial manipulation, speculation. And he was ridiculed. He said it was just his opponent said it was just a political gimmick. Speaker Boehner said, you know, the tools are in place. If we find this, and we can punish. Nobody's found it. And he's right about that. Go back and look during the Bush administration. He did the same thing. He called on Congress to crack down on. So this is about all presidents can do. They can kind of stamp their feet and say, you know, we're looking for wrongdoing, but there isn't really much they can do. And there are all kinds of oddities in the, you know, when California changes to warm weather gas, and there are more blends in California, that. And then you have our refineries. We need more refineries in this country. And for whatever reason, we haven't built a new refinery, so we can't really store the stuff. And so you've got these little kind of kinks in the system, but for the most part, these prices are set globally, and you know, we are one of the world's biggest consumers, but we're not. We're losing first place in terms of our consumption, or if we haven't lost it already, we will against China. And that's the other thing, is the pressures from China and India and Brazil, the developing countries, and their huge appetites are driving the prices up as well. Oh, and the other thing that's driving the prices up is the uncertainty about Iran. And, you know, you actually don't have to have a military event or something to actually happen to disrupt supplies. All you have to have is people talking about it. That kind of changes the equation.
You know, there's been some folks have said we should be releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to deal with these rising gasoline prices, although they have seemed to stabilize in the last couple of weeks. Do you see that happening?
Again, you can go back. I think Bush tapped it a bit. I think Clinton tapped it a bit. I don't think right now the situation warrants it at all. And if a couple of weeks ago, when people were calling on the president to do that, and if the prices had continued to escalate up, but they've seemed, as you said, they seem to have calmed down. Even if you tap the reserve, what would you get? You would get, you know, a month maybe of a little more gas. You know, you wouldn't really make an appreciable difference. So, and then to get anything through this Congress immediately, well, somebody up there immediately introduced a proposal that if Obama tried to tap the Strategic Oil Reserve, he must also instantly approve Keystone. You know, so they're always going to tie, you know, whatever their wish list is to it. So I'm sure the president would just as soon avoid any of that. But again, we're just, you know, we're not at a crisis point where that makes sense. And people don't know much about this reserve, but they equate it with energy security. It's like our little rainy day fund. And it's really got to be pouring before you dip into that. And I think people understand that. And if Obama did it now, it would look like a campaign gimmick. And if he's going to do a campaign gimmick, wait until it gets closer to the election. You don't do it in April.
Yeah, see if gas really is $5 a gallon.
Right, yeah, exactly. You got it.
Let's talk a little bit about conservation, because you mentioned Jimmy Carter and the sweater speech, and I'm old enough to remember the sweater speech, and then Ronald Reagan's response, Morning in America. You had the pessimistic Jimmy Carter saying our best days are behind us, we're going to have to adjust to a new reality, we're going to tighten our belts, we're just going to have to make do. Ronald Reagan came in and said, ignore all that.
That's right, I know.
No, don't worry, we're going to be fine. We're in a new era right now, and we know there's plenty of evidence out there that on buildings alone, for example, if we built all green buildings, we could save enormous amounts of electricity. Are voters, do they respond to a message about conservation at all?
Well, I remember when Reagan came into the White House, first of all, they took all the locks off the thermostat so you could lower the temperature, raise it, whatever you wanted to do. And they also removed the solar panels from the West Wing, which I thought was really, Carter had installed solar panels. And that was, again, it was totally ridiculed, and so that was the end of that. There's a lot of construction going on at the White House now. They may be putting them back. During the Carter era, there were tax benefits for, weather stripping, put weather stripping around your windows, get a tax break. I think people really do respond to that sort of stuff. I mean, even cash for clunkers was, economists argue that it didn't really make a significant dent in the economy, but it sure boosted the numbers for a moment, and it got some old cars off of the road. So, and I think people, I really would echo what Katie McGinty said this morning. If you could have a little meter, or if you got some way that you could see how you were saving money, or how you were wasting electricity or oil or whatever it is, I think people would definitely respond to that, and I do think children today are much more aware of, environmental issues, and some of them beat up on their parents who are not aware enough. I don't know how many people watch Mad Men, but that's about the early 60s, and during that period, people littered whenever they wanted. And they have a wonderful scene from Mad Men where they go out, I assume it's Central Park or some magnificent park, and they get up and they just leave all their stuff on the ground. And I remember when the first penalties for littering came out, and a lot of people thought, oh my God, that's terrible. Well, now people don't litter. We can change our habits. But the new show on HBO called Veep, with starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus, yes. I actually have a review of it in this week's Newsweek. I didn't much like it. It's because they portray her as a powerless dingbat. It's as though Sarah Palin got the job, or Julia's character from Seinfeld got the job. Anyway, and they curse all the time. But one of her projects is she wants to green the Congress, and so she gets frustrated because they have spoons made out of cornstarch, and when you put them in the hot water, they fold. And I watched this, and I thought, I didn't think that was all that funny. I said, what happened in real life is funnier. Nancy Pelosi had a green project for Capitol Hill, which was replacing all the plastic utensils, and of course the light bulb legislation which went through, which was actually sponsored by Republicans, and it still stands, and it came through during the Bush era, but somehow Obama gets blamed for that. Nobody likes those light bulbs, but when the Republicans won the House, they brought all the plastic utensils back, and they didn't like the other ones. They wanted the styrofoam back, and it's back. And Pelosi also evidently brought in more locally grown food and organic stuff. And John Boehner was quoted, he's so glad there's real food back in the cafeteria. So to me, real life is funnier sometimes than what the comedians can think of. But as we make these changes in our lifestyle, I bottled water now. Actually, kids now have have cavities because they're not getting enough fluoride because they're drinking bottled water. So it has a downside. But I became an addict of bottled water, and then my son and his now wife were living with me, and they told me all these horror stories about the plastic bottles found in the stomachs of cows and found in oceans, and how could you be using all these plastic bottles? And I explained, well, I use them, but I reuse them, I refill them. That really set them off. The germs, you're refilling them, you know? So I use metal or whatever, sustainable cups at home. I do not buy bottled water anymore. Now, that's a change. You can change your habits, and I think these habits, you know, one person at a time, it sounds a little silly, but when you multiply it by 300 million, it really does make a difference. And so I do think all of these little things can make a difference. And again, in 2008, during the campaign, I believe John McCain came out might have been maybe he wanted to dip into the oil reserve, or he wanted some way to give relief to the consumers. And Obama resisted and countered with, people should put more air in their tires. And that was really mocked, but it's true. If you keep air in your tires, you get more mileage. So there are lots of silly little things that people can do on a day-to-day basis that really don't challenge, they're not existential choices. You know, they can make a difference. But you have to have somebody taking it seriously and passing it along and making it, you know, part of you. And I think grade school kids are very receptive to this. And, you know, caring about the planet is also something that the most conservative of conservatives care about, the stewardship of the planet. And so I think there is some common ground to be had there.
So what role does Washington play then? Is it strictly a bully pulpit, trying to give us good examples? Is it incentives? It's
all of the above, to quote the earlier policies. It's the bully pulpit. It's, I think, incentives through the tax code, although there's no appetite for that right now, because right now they want to strip things away from the tax code, and you're not. So I think the powers that be in Washington, particularly on the Republican side, would see tax credits for weatherization and stuff like that as namby-pamby. They wouldn't go for that. So I don't see that right now. But I also think there are policy changes, and I would like to think that whoever is elected in November, you know, will, you know, step up and see whatever mandate or mini mandate emerges from this election, that coming up with a comprehensive energy policy is in everybody's interest. So.
But how do we get there? You've mentioned several times the polarization, and they're bringing back the styrofoam or bringing in the
right.
How in the world, given the political climate in Washington right now, do you ever get everybody to the table to agree on a coherent national energy policy?
Well, we're almost there. We almost have it, except I think, as it was said this morning, it's a lot of it's a jumble of little policies. One, I think you do have a titanic struggle going on in Washington between the fossil fuel industry and the emerging industries, and they each have an army of lobbyists. I think the fossil fuel industry probably at this point has more money and more clout. The emerging industries, they took a hit with Solyndra, but the Republicans really weren't able to make that into as big a scandal as they hoped, because they could really never find, a smoking gun of, a campaign contributor calling Obama saying, go out to Solyndra, and whatever. They never came up. So that's kind of faded. But you have this battle between the old and the new. It's going on in that area of life. It's going on in a lot of areas of life. It's going on in the media, the battle between the old and the new. I think you have to wean. The oil companies have gotten subsidies since early in the last century, that I think you have to wean them off of that. And maybe you still have to encourage some of the emerging industries, maybe not. Actually, solar, one of the reasons that Solyndra ran into problems is that the price for solar panels and things has taken such a nosedive. I mean, it's become much more mass-produced. And plus, we're being overtaken by Germany and China. And so I think you have to make the case to the American people. We always like to be number one. We don't like to be left out of the race. And I think that point was made this morning too, that this is really not a choice. This is the energy future. And if you want to be part of it, you've got to get involved. And if you look at the numbers, maybe here's somebody knows what the numbers are of how China subsidizes their industries, and you see what we're up against. So I mean, I think you do all of that. You encourage the electric car. You build the electric grid. You try to create communities in the future where people can actually walk, because you get into problems of obesity and health problems because of the way we've created this car culture. This morning when we stopped at Starbucks in the mall, the drive-through line was much longer than the walk-in line, even though it was just a few steps. So I think you have to approach this from many different ways, and it takes leadership. And I think that Obama's mindset is much more there than Romney's. I mean, this would be much higher priority in a second Obama administration than in a first Romney administration. I think that's just the culture of the two men and the culture of the two parties. I mean, Romney has a house with a 4-car garage which has an elevator in it. So I just don't see him as a big conserving guy.
It's interesting here in Pittsburgh, we've really tried, at least on a regional basis, trying to come to grips with this. We created, and Tori Herring-Smith from W&J, Columbia Gas are part of the Energy Alliance of Greater Pittsburgh. And we've got literally CEOs across 7 different energy industries: coal, natural gas, nuclear, solar, wind, transmission and distribution, and green building, all at the table together, trying to figure this out and trying to see how do we really engineer a portfolio approach, at least here in our region.
Right.
But maybe it's something that's easier to do on a regional basis in some ways than it is given the current national climate.
Yeah, if you get out of Washington where the polarization is more extreme and where everybody thinks everybody's got an R or a D on their forehead and everybody is trying to figure out how to make the other guy look bad. I'm a big fan of President Clinton's global initiative. And over the weekend on Sirius Radio, it was an hour-long interview with Clinton and his daughter Chelsea. And it came out of the 3rd annual meeting of what they call the Clinton Global Initiative University. They bring 1,000 students, and they met at George Washington University earlier in April, from all 50 states and 82 countries. And they all come with ideas or what they're doing to create positive change. And the winner this year was three George Washington students who had developed a bamboo bicycle, which is sustainable and very inexpensive for developing countries. The tires are not bamboo, but everything else is. The challenge for next year is for all these student teams to come up with ways to cut the deficit, and accompanied by a plan to market it and advertise it to the public. And Clinton is partnering with Pete Peterson, who's the well-known deficit hawk and a Republican. And Clinton said, he's a Republican and he knows I'm more liberal. But his wife, he said, I've never asked her, but I think she's mostly a Democrat. And their son went to Africa and did development work. And Peterson knows that I don't want this country to be in bondage to debt, and he knows that I think we need to do all these other things. And he said, Peterson said to me, I'm 83. He said, I don't want to get in a fight. I just want to get something done. And so Clinton said, this is how you sit down and you set aside all the other things. Do you really think global warming is man-made or not? Should creationism be taught in the schools? Or, you don't have to solve every one of the differences. You just got to come up with, set a goal and find some ways to get there. And so Clinton's a magician with words, and so I think he could charm anyone. But he's doing very good things. with that organization. And I think it really does set a template for what government could then do to assist, maybe, if they come up with ideas that are workable.
Since we're meeting in Washington, PA, instead of Washington, D.C., we probably should touch a little bit on natural gas specifically, since Washington, of course, has been at the epicenter of the entire Marcellus shale boom, and a lot of the shale gas plays across the country in a lot of ways. Right now, natural gas, extremely low price, seems to be distorting the conversation about energy resources of all kinds. Yeah, how's it playing out as part of this national debate at all? Is there awareness of natural gas? What's it really doing?
Well, Ed Markey, member of Congress from Massachusetts, who is the ranking member on energy and resources in the House, he's very suspicious of attempts now to export natural gas because he thinks that's really going to impact consumers here at home. And then you have a real battle between people who are worried about the environmental impact. And I might mention that Diane Rehm, I don't know how many of you listened to her show, she's based in Washington. She and her husband have a farm that's apparently right in the middle of all of this. And so she devotes a number of shows, and she always points out that she has this conflict of interest, but she is very interested in the whole thing. And of course, the EPA just came out with, I think, a very mild regulation that only regulates one aspect of the pollution that comes after the fracking.
Some of the air quality issues.
From the air quality, right, exactly. And then you had the earthquakes in Ohio, and of course we had an earthquake in Washington, D.C. last August, which I don't think I can relate that to fracking.
I don't think they were drilling down in southern Virginia where the epicenter was.
No, but people are unsettled when events occur that they're not accustomed to, and they seem out of, even snow in April is a little unsettling. So I think, fracking bears a lot more examination before we go rushing headlong. And I think the EPA has just kind of tiptoed in. But look at the pushback they're getting from the industry, and so you get this on every level when you try to balance the various interests. And we're a capitalistic society, and so the drive to cash in is there, and it's created in like Oklahoma. It's been it's the modern day oil boom. It really is spectacular, and then you create a whole generation of people whose jobs are dependent on it. But you can't. I think we know too much about the side effects. It makes me wonder if fracking is this generation's version of the strip mining that did so much damage, I think, in West Virginia. So I think you have to take this into account.
Well, but there are pros and cons in any one of these big energy industries. One of the things that's always struck me, it doesn't matter which one you choose. Choose coal, choose natural gas, choose nuclear. These are enormous operations. I don't think unless people actually go visit a nuclear power plant or go to a drilling site or go deep underground into a coal mine, you really appreciate what it takes in terms of industrial operations and output to keep the lights on everywhere. There's pros and cons everywhere. Does that figure into this at all?
There's pros and cons everywhere in that, but every so often there's a spectacular event that underscores. The BP oil spill was one. What happened in Japan. Germany is now shut down, I think, the majority of its reactors, and I think Japan is doing the same thing. So there are events, and then there are events. And when a big one happens, even though the BP oil spill had people riveted for weeks, if not months, we watched the underground camera. People thought that was going to make a significant impact on the American psyche. As soon as it faded from the front page, people were more worried about gas prices, the jobs of people down there. And occasionally you'll find tucked into the paper on one of the inner pages some reports of some health issues or the fact that BP got off kind of easy. The ripple effect continues from these events, and people have there's a psychological aversion to, certainly to nuclear energy. There's a real fear.
I was going to ask you, where do you
It's a
think
real
that stands
fear.
politically now, given what happened
Well,
with the Fukushima Daiichi?
Well, I think, you know, Obama tried, he saw it as that a Democrat would be embracing to some extent nuclear energy. He saw that as an olive branch that he could go to the other side. Well, he didn't really get much response for it. And there hasn't been a new, I mean, Susan would know more about this than me, there hasn't been a new nuclear plant built for some time.
Southern Company's got one under construction
Got one
now
under
down in
construction.
Georgia.
How
Two?
long, right, how long has that taken, and is the government, the government underwrites it if there's any kind of, yeah, there are loan guarantees. I know there were some members of Congress who were really upset that all of the risk was shifted to the federal government. So, you know, these remain challenges.
It's funny, it's not funny, fascinating. I mean, Pittsburgh, our region, really has a stake in all of this. We're one of the
3 Mile
largest.
Island, I remember.
Well, but also
Right.
we're home of Westinghouse Electric,
Right.
which is building the plants down in, you know, remains one of the real centers of nuclear engineering in America. Huge coal mining industry here in the region, very important to our economy. The epicenter of the Marcellus Shale. You know, this enormous
Right.
natural gas reserve. We manufacture parts for windmills and solar power plants, and we've really got a piece of the action across all these different
Right.
issues. The stakes for our region in particular are very high, depending on what plays out nationally and how, and geopolitically, I guess, in terms of internationally as well.
Right. Well, going back to Jimmy Carter, he made a point of visiting 3 Mile Island to show that it was safe, as I recall. And I also remember going down into a mine with him in Pennsylvania. Big long name starting with an S.
Okay. Which one? Shanapin? Shenango?
Anyway, I have a picture of me with a hard hat. Yeah, because he really put a focus on all of that, and he had a vested interest from a policy perspective in convincing people that we come out of 3 Mile Island okay.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I want to pick up on something Susan Eisenhower said, which is kind of an interesting point. You know, do we really want to be energy independent? Because maybe we just want to use everybody else's resources and keep ours in the ground and save them for the future, right? But beyond that point, you can react to that if you want. But just in general, you know, in your view, is energy really a national security issue for this country? Is it?
As much as the economy is, I mean, I think the view of America as of America's strength is tied to its ability to keep the lights on, and that's energy production and reliance on energy. And in terms of, you know, should we just keep ours in the ground and use everybody else's, I'm going to go back to what Clinton said, again, in addressing all of these young people. He said that this younger generation, he said, gets what a lot of older people don't get, and that is that we are interdependent, that we really are. This is a one world, and that we will be prosperous together, or we will seek adversity. And I don't think you can hog your energy, and I think it's a global market, and I think that you have to understand that we have, I think, 5% of the world's oil, and we consume 20%. So we're really not in a position to, you know, we're supplicants in this, and I think we need to understand that.
I wonder too, a final question. I've been fascinated by W&J's introduction to this energy index. Apparently nobody ever thought to do this before.
Right.
Do you think it's going to be an important contribution to the national conversation?
Oh, I think it's eye-opening, because it's counterintuitive to what people are seeing on their television screens. People are seeing pundits and politicians basically saying we're not drilling enough. We're reliant on the insecure Middle East. Solar and renewables, you know, are fanciful. They can't really make a difference. And these numbers tell an entirely different story, that we've cut our consumption, that renewables are beginning to make an impact, and that we've got a we've diversified our energy picture, and anybody who invests or anything understands that diversification is, it's the new, it's this century's plastics. Diversify. And that, you know, whether Obama has created this policy or is benefiting from it or whatever, you can take your ideological viewpoint. But those are the facts, and I think it's really nice to have a neutral academic place that is actually looking at the facts in a world that is just spins on rhetoric most of the time. So I really welcome it.
All right. Eleanor Clift, thank you so much.
Okay, thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.